Um, I also want an India that does not lie to itself. That's also my vision and hope for 2047. I don't think we can achieve that by 2017, but maybe by 2047, something miraculous will happen. A third commission discovers that Rohit Vemula is not a Dalit. Okay? The local authority, the Tahsildar, found that he was a Dalit. The ultimate authority of the district collector of Guntur, found him to be a Dalit. But a commission was nonetheless set up to find that he is not a Dalit. This is a nation that lies to itself. Maybe our vision should be of one that is able to look itself in the mirror and recognize ourselves for what we are and who we are, that with all our greatness, with all our beauty and brilliance, also goes a fair degree of barbarism and cruelty. Let me tell you, Maharashtra on farm suicides has had 13 committees. In India, you have as many committees as it takes until one of them gives the government the report it wants. Yeah. Usually, the NCRB numbers are out on June 30th latest every year on farmers' suicides. For 19 years, we had one set of numbers, one kind of methodology, and one group counted of farmers. In the parliament questions, you can see the figure only refers to farmers, which is under the definition of the census, the main cultivator who has operated a piece of land for 180 days or more, which is 6 months. There's a reason for that. Otherwise, every corporate executive who goes to tend his grapes in Nashik on a Sunday becomes a farmer. So you have a certain qualification level, a limit, whatever placed on that. Right? You have that. And the farm suicide numbers, suddenly the entire game changed in 2014 data. Okay, suddenly. And the number of farmer suicides fell by more than half, even as the number of suicides in the agrarian sector went up. How did they do this? By changing the data heads. They created contract farmer as a category, which is tenant farmer. They created agricultural laborers as a separate category, and there are academics willing to go along with this and work the research backwards to say that what was there earlier also had these three categories in it. It is not true, and you can check that with parliamentary questions and answers of the ministers who say these are farmers. Nowhere was the word agricultural laborer used. So last year, what did they do? They created these three categories, knowing, and I know it because I know who brought the changes, knowing fully well that in India, tenant farmers have no record. Tenant farmers have no documents. 95% of tenant farmers have, in fact, that's one of the most vulnerable sections to suicide. They don't get credit from the banks because they don't have a name on the patta. Okay? They don't get anything. So, when you create a category called tenant farmers, in 95% of the cases, they have no proof that the person was a tenant farmer, so that person now goes into the category called agricultural labor. You know what the data show last year? Far more agricultural laborers committed suicide than farmers in India. A claim that no labor union of agricultural workers has made, a claim nobody has ever made, but because it's full of thousands of tenant farmers who cannot be counted as farmers because you've created this category. Now this year, here is my information from there. Despite all these games, the main farmer category has gone up 40%. Just the main farmer category. And they are stuck with it and don't know how the hell to handle it. And by the way, more and more states are declaring that India is the best place to be a farmer because 12 states and 6 union territories have declared 0 farmer suicides. Nowhere in the world is that possible. 12 states and 6 union territories in the 2014 data. In 1997, there was not a single state that said 0. In 2014, There are states which had 15,000 suicides in the previous 10 years, which since 2011 have been declaring zero, like Chhattisgarh. States which have had an average of 850 a year for a decade, and since 2011, zero, like West Bengal. We're talking about millions of farmers in these states. So you're just making the figure zero and the numbers, so the suicides can go up and the numbers are falling. There have always been huge discrimination in the counting of police, because police don't go by the census, they go by what the DSP has said. Right? Their manual is different. 90% of women in this country, farmers who commit suicide, are excluded because they are not seen as farmers. There is no land in their name. There is no patta in their name. None of these damned clowns who write about this have ever been to a house where there's a suicide. None of them has been present when the enumerator, when the tahsildar, when the policeman has arrived. For my sins, I've been to 900 of them since 1998. Okay? It's horrible. It's the most demoralizing experience on earth. What happens? The cop comes there. First thing he'll tell the family, patta dikao. Patta dikao. Now, your name is not on the patta, you're not a farmer. That rules out all the women on the farms. Do you know the best place in the world to be a woman farmer? Haryana and Punjab. They don't have women farmer suicides because they don't admit that women can be farmers. So you'll find that Haryana and Punjab, the women's suicides categories are blowing up. They're exploding because all the farm girls are going there. Then you have overlaps which nobody can help. I agree. There are overlaps which you and I cannot help. Like a girl, many girls in Andhra, Maharashtra, pulled out of their school and college during the agrarian crisis, commit suicide, it's recorded as a student suicide. Or because their parents are not able to get them married. How do you, so there is an overlap, you can't do anything about that. It's not an easy question to answer. But there are people now writing that the people speaking about farm suicides are ignoring the fact that women and adolescent women suicides are much higher. Compare a gender and an occupation. You're saying that women can't be farmers and farmers can't be women. You're accepting the government's cheapest propaganda levels by doing this. Speaking of farms and enquiries, listen to the notes of the farmers who have committed suicide when you are taking your enquiry. 18 days ago, Gopal Baba Rao Rathod, a 22-year-old, committed suicide in Yavatmal, in Vidarbha. Okay? In village Marwadi. And here he is. One of the things that he's asking you, he says, in cricket teams, in IPL leagues, in volleyball leagues, the children of the rich and the businessmen can play. What about the children of farmers and laborers? A teacher's son or a government officer's son can easily afford the fees of rupees 1 lakh to become an engineer. How will the farmer's son afford that? How will the farmer's children afford that? We can't afford 10,000. When banks are approached for loans, they ask for some property as a mortgage. But what about those who have no property? What will they offer? Salaried individuals get dearness allowance raises without even asking for it, declared by government. We, with our cultivation costs going up every year, what raises do we get? Gopal Baba Rao Rathod. Yeah. And you know the tehsil from which he came. I'm speaking to my friend Nayak of Sakal. He says, in police stations, an FIR is filed without an inquiry if asked for. He's saying, implying, by what kind of law is that? Unemployed, anyway. And then he says, if you can't bring happiness to others, at least don't bring sorrow. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, father. Goodbye, brother and sister. I go now. You read the notes. There are dozens of these notes which the police don't allow out. We still get hold of them. Of Rameshwar Lonkar, who one of the astonishing things about the suicide notes of the farmers, I have not seen this anywhere in the world. They're not addressed to the loved ones, they're not addressed to the family. They're addressed to the finance minister, to the chief minister, to the prime minister, and to the president, because the farmer is aware that he is the victim of human agency and policy. Their suicide notes tell you that. They address them to the president of India, to Rameshwar, and what's more, they play the game. If you're a small person in a village, half your life goes in a struggle for authenticity. So when Ramachandra Rameshwar Raut killed himself, he'd put a detailed suicide note on a 100 rupee stamped revenue paper, because he wanted to be taken seriously. Okay? So he got, paper is signed by Upakosh Tehsildar, who never read what the heck went into it. Yeah, it's got the Upakosh Tehsildar stamp on it. We published that in the Hindu. Maybe I have a vision and a hope of an India in 2047 free from hunger and free from enforced hunger caused by the success and affluence of the few leading to the misery of the millions. If we can do that, if we can end that kind of hunger, that will be a very great achievement, and I think we can. In the United States, the top 1% owned 37%, and all economists are agreed that the US in its present phase is more unequal than it has ever been in this century. And yet, India's is greater, 53% ownership. Compare that with rural India. The Socio-Economic Caste Census, what does it tell you? 75% of 17.9 crore rural households, 75% of all rural households, the main breadwinner takes home less than 5,000 rupees. You raise that bar to 10,000, it's 90% of rural families. Just over 8% of rural households has a member earning more than 10,000. If you apply that to Adivasi and Dalit households, that figure falls to about half. 400 million in the last 10 years have never completed or never come out of an educational institution, let alone go into it. 51% of rural households depend on manual casual labor for a living. Over a third of rural India is still illiterate. Salaried houses in scheduled caste households is 7.3%. In scheduled tribe households, 7.4%. And 36% of rural Indians are illiterate. What do? I said the old inequalities are reinforced by the new. The states of Haryana, Punjab, and Gujarat Haryana and Rajasthan have passed laws which exclude 80 to 90% of all Dalit women from contesting the post of Sarpanch, from contesting even the Pancha position, the ward member's position, by bringing in educational qualifications as a requirement. If you look at your budget statement of revenue foregone, under the heads, direct corporate income tax, customs duty exemptions, excise duty waivers, in the last budget, 5,34,000 crores. Since 2007, from when the data is available, we have written off 42.3 trillion rupees. Okay? With just what we have written off on gold, diamonds, and jewelry, which is 73,000 crores in the current budget. In 8 years, we could provide, on that amount, I'm talking about since 2007. The total amount written off on gold, diamonds, and jewelry, which comes to about 1.6 lakh crore, it comes to several lakh crores, much more than that. Your universal health care for 10 years would cost 1.6 lakh crores according to a government's estimate. Now, every hungry Indian could be provided food grain for the next 50 years on that 42.3 trillion rupees. Okay? And here we are celebrating inequality, and most shamefully, and come lastly to the media. The media always come last. We need a new vision of media. there was a vision for media. It wasn't spelt out for media at all. Gandhi meant something else entirely. But I have always thought, I always used to think, that Gandhi's talisman was a brilliant fit for journalism, especially for Indian journalism and its wonderful traditions of 180 years. There were many beautiful things in Indian journalism, wonderful things in Indian journalism. Please, guys, those of you who are in that age group, the larger part of Indian journalistic history is very distinguished. It's not the Bombay Times. Okay? There was some, once upon a time there were journalists, Sukumar. Now we have content generators. Once upon a time there were readers and viewers and audiences. Now we count clicks. Yeah? Now we count clicks and hits. People don't happen. Journalists are content producers and content. I'm not a content generator. I'm a journalist, okay? I'm a reporter. I like being that. I don't want to be a clickbait. Now, in 2017, if we're talking about the vision for the future, what about the media in the present? Is it unreasonable for me to ask of the media in 2017? Is it unreasonable to ask that the media practiced something, strange as it is, something called journalism, and do so with something approaching near human intelligence and sensitivity? I want to say this, that look at how debased journalism has become in the last decade. In the last decade or two, all the great stories of journalism have come from non-professional journalists. They've come from WikiLeaks. They've come from Edward Snowden. Right? Some of the greatest stories that have shook the world have come from outside the mainstream media, and certainly outside the corporate media. Of course, there are exceptions and all those. I'll assume that you have accepted all those disclaimers from me. But we've accepted that the media are a business. Here's your tragedy. We live in the most diverse country in the world. We live in the most heterogeneous, most diverse, most uniquely complex societies or collection of societies in the world. And you are trying to keep yourself informed on that by a media that is ever more homogeneous, ever narrower in its control, ever narrower in its ownership and vision. It's impossible. Such a complex, heterogeneous society cannot be covered by such a concentrated, homogeneous media. You cannot do it. I want you to know this, especially a younger generation sitting here. Journalism, art, literature, these did not come out of corporate investments. They came out of communities and societies. My vision is that we return them to communities and people. That is possible, it's achievable. It can be done. So, in summary, what is that vision? What can we ask for? What can we look for in 2047? An India where all work is decent work, and a country free of degrading and dehumanizing occupations like those of manual scavenging. An India where Dalits will have decisively won what I believe is the greatest battle on earth for human dignity, that first human right to be recognized as human. An India free of arbitrary and authoritarian power and of the arrogance of arbitrary power. An India where every child is in school and where not where as we are now, where 400 million have never been to school. An India where, as our constitution demands, childhood and youth are guaranteed protection against exploitation and against material and moral abandonment. Please look at the directive principles of state policy in your constitution, but also please look at the most neglected and blacked out clauses of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. clauses 23 to 26, which speak of the right to a decent wage, the right to a decent employment, the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, right? All those rights are there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Some of them are reflected in your directive principles of state policy. There is an overlap. But please look at rights 23 to 27. I want also an India free of the kind of techno-fix illusions that we live in. Like this idiocy of integrating and linking 37 rivers by clowns who have no concept of what nature is about and what rivers are about, what water is about. And India free, the India envisioned in the directive principles of state policy where, and this is critical, the operation of the economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment, that the ownership and control of material resources, are actually so distributed that they do not lead to the detriment of the greater majority. An India free of gross and grotesque inequality. Ambedkar, in November 25th, 1949, made that moving speech on inequality. Today we enter an era of contradictions, where we have equality in politics, but inequality in society and economy. One day the contradiction between the two will implode our democracy. Truer words were never spoken, and we are at that crossroads today. An India free of communal and sectarian prejudice, hatred, and violence, where the secular ideal actually also reflects in the firm and complete separation of state and religion. I was in Telangana last week. What Godavari Pushkaran, Krishna Pushkaran, chief ministers taking the first dip and spending 2,000 crores of public money. This hideously, grotesquely whipped up religiosity, not religion, but religiosity that is whipped up. I hope we have an India free of that. An India where land, water, and forest are owned by people, by communities, and societies with full regard and respect for all the creatures and species that share those resources with us. And that share with us, not to be run on the basis that technology can solve every problem. An India where law and justice are inextricably linked, where the operation of the one must lead to the achievement of the other. Okay? Apart from Ambedkar, and many, well over a century, I don't know how many decades apart, over and above a century, Victor Hugo wrote, "There is no force on earth mightier than an idea whose time has come." And I believe that time has come. In 2017, try to make it come right by 2047. And the idea is social, political, economic, cultural, and gender justice. Thank you. Thank you.